Hi booktube, Aaron here, hope you're doing very well. Today I've got a bit of a random reading update for you, maybe something of a festive reading update, since this will be the last reading update I do before Christmas and things start sort of winding down a bit towards the new year. And I've finished a few books since the last update I did a week or two ago. But I wanted to address, firstly, I've been tagged in a number of tags that are festive themed, and unfortunately I haven't got to any of them. So I'm going to sort of bookmark them and hopefully do them next year. We'll see how that goes. But apologies to I think it was Pat and Daniela, who have both tagged me in two Christmas themed tags. I'll get round to them. And I'm going up, well, tonight I'm driving up to spend Christmas with some extended family, and so I'm taking some books up with me, so I might finish a few other things before the end of the year. And I've filmed a few videos. I've filmed two other videos apart from this, so I think you'll see this one first, and then you might see two more, yeah, at least before the end of the year. So if I don't speak to you before then, happy Christmas, and I hope you have a lovely rest of the year. So let's jump into the books that I've finished, and these aren't going to be, as usual, if you watch my videos, they're not particularly in-depth reviews. Every now and then I do them. I was kind of tempted by a couple of these books to give them their own standalone video, but in the end I decided against it. Maybe if I reread them, I might do it then. So the first book I want to talk about and just share some general thoughts about is Solenoid by Mircea Cărtărescu. This is translated from the Romanian by Sean Cotter. Is it Cotter or Cutter? Cotter. And I really actually quite liked it, but found it quite intense, and also it was one of those ones where once I'd got to the end, I felt very glad that I'd finished it. It did feel a little like it was weighing me down. At the same time, there was something really kind of enchanting about it. It was almost like an obsession, and it was keeping me turning the pages, and I was enjoying it in a very strange way. However, yeah, it felt like a relief almost once that weight was off my shoulders and I'd finished it. And the I'm trying to think of how to start, because usually I'll just say what it's about, and yet if I'm going off the blurb and sort of generally speaking about what it's generally about, it's almost a little misleading in a way. But our main character is a failed writer and a teacher living in Bucharest in the sort of 1970s and 80s. The sort of framing of the book is that it's sort of like a diary. It's his loose jottings, really, and he's barely written anything in years. He'd aspired to be a poet, wrote this long, super involved, super referential poem that he thought was the greatest thing ever written, and then it's shot down in this workshop that he goes to, and he just sort of fades into the background and sort of gives up on literature. He loses his faith in literature. He gets a job as a teacher and just gets into the the very monotonous routine of ferrying himself from school and back home. However, this is a very surreal book, and it's one of those books where it's something I quite appreciate in some books, when you can't tell what's real or not. You're not sure whether this is a fantastical book, and it's in the world of the book all of this is really happening, or whether because this is all in first person and it's very much this one character seeing the world, which is sometimes very interesting, sometimes very strange. Sometimes it throws up some weird stuff and some issues. But it's very much the way he sees things, and he says very early on he can't tell between reality and his dreams and his fantasies. They're all kind of bleeding into each other, and that's the kind of book that we have. There's a very surreal, odd world that very often mirrors his own fears, his own obsessions, his own neuroses. And it can be quite unsettling at times. It can be funny at times. One of my favourite sort of set pieces of the book, and there are a few set pieces in the book, is he's a teacher, and one of his colleagues and him go out to this abandoned factory where they've been told that all the kids go to sort of flunk off school, and they can't find a door that opens to get in. And so they find a sewerage pipe, an open pipe that looks like it leads into the factory, and so they go in that way. And there's this really sort of uncanny atmosphere in the old factory. The architecture is odd. You'd expect it to be very industrial, and there are some sort of industrial elements, and yet a lot of it is like. Going off the motifs and the decorations, it sounds very much like a church, like an old I don't know, Catholic or maybe an Orthodox church, an old ruined medieval building almost, with these motifs of angels and things like that there, very decorative. And yet there's this sort of technological stuff going on in there that seems to be working on its own, and they can't tell whether it's steam powered, gas powered, connected to the electric mains. They have no way of being able to see, but it seems to be working on its own. And then there's this sort of these sort of labyrinthine passages they go through, and there are he really likes the word diorama. It's one of his favourite words. It comes up almost all the time. All these weird creatures in glass, sort of strange embryonic creatures, sort of homunculuses almost, some sort of mites and lice and sort of other parasites. He's obsessed with parasites. From page 1, the whole book begins. The first thing you hear is him saying, "I have lice again." So again, parasitical creatures is a motif that comes up again and again in this book. And yeah, these giant tapeworms, and it's disgusting and weird. But as you heard from the very beginning of that book, one of his obsessions is parasites and lice and all these weird things, and he obsesses about it. And it comes up again and again and again in the book, and here it is blown up in like, I don't know, 100 times its natural size. And there are some other strange things in there. And he goes back and something even stranger goes in there. And if you want a taste of where that goes up, I would recommend watching Jack from the Rambling Raconteur. He's got a very well balanced review of the book. He did particularly enjoy it. Go watch his if you'd like to. I don't know how much of the other strange, surreal elements to go into. The book begins with some literal navel gazing. He thinks he has lice again. He goes to have a bath, and he's cleaning himself, and he finds around his belly button something that feels hard and something different and a little painful. And he gets out and he pulls it out, and it seems to be rope or string. And apparently he thinks it's what was used to sort of tie up his his belly button, his umbilical cord, when he was a baby, and apparently it's a very old and probably quite frowned upon method of doing that. There are plenty of other strange, sort of strange occurrences, strange uncanny occurrences. As a character, he's a very odd person, quite a troubled person. He's had some challenges. We learned that when he was born, he had a twin, something that's called a mirror twin, which I think is a real thing, where the organs are all on the other side. So the one twin is literally a mirror image of the other, and his twin disappears. They don't know where. Apparently he's dead, but they never get any kind of official confirmation of that. So that's just one of many childhood traumas. He was very ill as a child. He was taken off to a tuberculosis sanatorium for children because his mother, when he was a baby, she was having trouble producing milk. The only alternative they had was a cow that one of their neighbours had, for him to drink that cow's milk, and that cow had tuberculosis, and so it was sort of the only choice. He could either die or grow up and potentially have tuberculosis when he grows up, which is what happens. Strange things happen in the tuberculosis sanatorium as well. And then the other thing I should probably mention is his house. His house is, he keeps referring to it as a boat-shaped house. It's not really boat-shaped, and he goes into that. But again, it seems to keep generating new rooms, and he's constantly exploring it. And the idea of, I don't think he calls them parallel universes, but rather more like, what's the other one? It's not parallel, it's like a perpendicular universe. And it's an idea of a kind of multiverse where, in a kind of Borgesian way, and if I understood my physics better, I'd be able to let you know some physicist who has sort of theorized this, but the idea of forking paths, and so our reality is sort of perpendicular to other ones because they're sort of forking off each other, and then in the book there's the possibility that they might all converge again at the end, that's one of the many ways that's sort of explored. It's another of the many motifs in the book, and I could go on about so many of the ways that this book is quite strange, but I wanted to just try and pin it down to what I thought the book was about, or what the book seemed to be expressing at its core. And for me, at least what I was picking up on, is that this is a book about pain, and it's a book about trying to escape pain. And so there's a lot of emotional trauma, a lot of questionable, there are many questionable medical procedures, and then he has this real fear, a phobia of going to any kind of clinic, whether it's just to get an injection or to go to the dentist or just a checkup. He's absolutely afraid, and so it's no surprise that in all these significant places in the book where strange things happened, there's also a dentist's chair. That's just a weird thing that happens, which sort of makes sense once you sort of reach those points in the book, or at least once you get towards the end of the book. But yeah, I think it's about pain. It's about him as an individual trying to escape pain, and it has a sort of political element as well, as I said, set in Bucharest in Romania in the 70s and 80s under a very repressive government, and so that the idea of somehow trying to escape pain, can it be through literature? He tries it doesn't work. Can it be through these parallel, perpendicular, forking paths? Potentially. but for me, this is what gives the book its poignancy and its weight. And if that hadn't have been becoming increasingly apparent to me as I was reading the book, I would have been constantly questioning why I was reading it, because it is, there are times where it feels very repetitive and monotonous. But I would recommend it. However, if what I've said about it sort of puts you off, then don't feel pressed to read it, because I don't think it's a book for everyone. A couple of things that often come up, some of the sort of criticisms that I've heard of it. One, the sort of amount of misogyny that's in the book. I don't think Cărtărescu is a misogynistic person or a writer, from what I can tell. However, there are, I would say, depictions of misogyny in there. And also just remember, we're very much in the mind of a particular quite troubled individual as well. And so the way he sees women is very evident as well. And again, that's something that that Jack gets into in his discussion of the book. And there was something else I was going to get into. There was the yeah, and the sort of stuff to do with a lot of mental health, and it can get quite heavy at times. But by the end, at least for me, it felt quite cathartic. So yeah, give it a go if that sounds okay, and if some of the criticisms that come up, you know, if it sort of weighs out and you feel like you could read it, then yeah, let me know what you think. I just remembered one of the other things, but I don't think I'll get into it. Maybe some other time. The other book that I wanted to discuss, and it's another one that I might have a fair bit to say about, but I don't know, because it all boils down to one point, so we'll see. But it's the Western Canon by Harold Bloom, the Books and School of the Ages. And what is this book? So if you just sort of look at the title and look at the table of contents, you'd think it's him essentially boiling down who the most important writers are, who he thinks are the most important touchstone if you're looking at you know, what we might call canonical writing of you know, the tradition of Western literature. And so we've got Shakespeare, Dante, Chaucer, Cervantes, Montaigne, Milton, Samuel Johnson, Goethe, Wordsworth. There's Jane Austen, Emily Dickinson, Dickens, George Eliot, and so on. And it's sort of him getting down to maybe what's most important about literature, and why he feels these books represent that best, and you know, and certainly that's in there. The issue with the book, the thing that's quite, I think probably quite frustrating for a number of readers, is that this book is one side of a polemic. You know, at this time, in the years leading up to him writing this book, Bloom could feel a shift in academia and in the cultural world, where people were paying more attention to a writer's ethnicity and, you know, any kind of other sort of background, you know, and that was being explored in the book. Sorry, I think my phone was trying to turn off mid-video. And essentially, Bloom kind of riled against that, and would call sort of anyone on that kind of side of things, I suppose today we'd call it identity politics, referred to them as the school of resentment. And essentially, that there might be some points where he's potentially right, other points where you might think he's just a little over the top and being a bit of a drama queen, I think. He gets really scared that no one's going to be reading these authors except for a few specialists. And I don't think that's going to be the case anytime soon, even if academia has changed its perspective. If English courses are more interested in going into other directions, there's not necessarily anything. I don't think there's particularly anything wrong with that. I think you can always find quite a balanced place to be if you want to. If you want the best of both worlds, you can study Chaucer and also look into post-colonialism. That the ball, I think, is always in your court as a reader, as a student, and so that's sort of where I position myself. I'm just happy to take in as much as I can, and I think Bloom was, he felt very strongly about his own project, his own perspective on literature, and felt like that was being encroached upon. And so, whether or not he's right or not, his continual sort of diatribe against this change, and how sort of fearing that it's all going to end before too long. It got old very, very quickly, and so if I go through the table of contents, we'll see how it goes. But essentially, it begins with a preface. The preface is actually preface and prelude, and then the first chapter is called An Elegy for the Canon. I would say if you're just dipping into this and you want to know what Bloom has to say about certain authors, I would say just skip them. It gets very repetitive very quickly. And again, when it comes to Shakespeare, and even some of the bits on Dante and Shakespeare, I can't remember as it went on, but certainly in the first few chapters, these issues were still very heavy on his mind, and it does come up throughout the book, but particularly at the beginning, it just constantly feels like you're being hit by it. Just sort of bear that in mind. I would sort of add to that essentially Bloom's position is that he, as a critic, and it sounds a bit weird saying this, but he is elitist, and he thinks that criticism should be elitist because that's literally what criticism is. It's saying this is better than that, and when you hear it said that way, it sort of makes sense. However, we do have at the moment in our current cultural climate, we have a strong aversion to words like elitism, and you can also then ask the question: is that should that be what academies are doing? Should they just be saying what's better than all the rest? Is that the only thing that they can do? Are there other ways to think about literature than just saying what's better than the rest? But he also riles against any kind of ideological reading, and to be fair to him, I think when we think of ideological, we tend to place that word a little more on what you might call the left side of the spectrum. He doesn't like an ideological reading from any side of the sort of political or whatever kind of spectrum you can think of. He doesn't care for a conservative sort of reading in their views into a certain work of literature, or a particularly religious sort of allegorical reading of Kafka or whatever. And obviously there are certain books that have religious elements, but whether or not he's very skeptical as to whether these works are being didactic and telling us what to think and trying to give us moral or religious lessons is something he does rile against. He thinks that's not the point of reading, that's not the point of literature, and I did appreciate that. And so yeah, not sure about it. I did think it was good, and when he's on to an author that he really loves, and yeah, just everything seems to be working. It's amazing. When he's writing about Shakespeare, it's brilliant. I loved his essays on. There's one about Montaigne and Molière, and how if you sort of squish the two together, they're the sort of French equivalent to Shakespeare, but you need both of them to encapsulate all of Shakespeare. The Milton, there's just one about really just about Satan in Paradise Lost, and that was really, really good. I really enjoyed his Goethe's his Goethe chapter. He was just focusing on part 2 of Faust, and usually my rule of thumb in here was that if I hadn't read that much or anything by the author he was discussing, I'd probably find what he had to say a little less interesting. Whereas with Goethe and with one other in particular in here, actually with 2 others in here, it was really, really good, and it got me. It made me feel less intimidated about reading them, so that was really, really good. There was probably my favourite chapter in here was a chapter called Canonical Memory in early Wordsworth and Jane Austen's Persuasion. And I would never have thought of putting Jane Austen and Wordsworth into the same chapter, but that was really, really amazing. I don't think the title of the chapter is very good, since the core concept that he's playing with there is hope rather than memory, and so maybe I don't know. It's a gripe I often have with Harold Bloom, is that he can say, you know, he has some amazing insights, but I think he's terrible at titles. They often don't represent what he's saying at all. I didn't particularly like the chapter on Walt Whitman. I thought it got away from him, and he was making no sense whatsoever. I think this is one of the areas where I think he's slightly hypocritical, is that he'll talk about not wanting to include a religious or moral or ideological reading of a text. He just wants to encounter it and see what it's doing, and yet he's got a very odd sort of kind of Gnostic, sort of mystical way of looking at literature, and he can very happily read that into almost anything, and it's probably there with Whitman, and yet he's not. It doesn't feel like he is expressing it and coming to it on the same terms that Whitman would, and so I felt like that was an element of a little bit of hypocrisy on Whitman's on Bloom's part. He also often just reads Freud into almost anything as well, which again is sort of the same issue. There was an essay on Bleak House and Middlemarch, which was brilliant, and that made me feel like I need to go and read Middlemarch. One on Tolstoy, which was good. What else was there? There's an amazing chapter on Proust on the true persuasion of sexual jealousy. That was good. And then the Joyce chapter was brilliant. I really enjoyed that, and it's the first thing that I've read about Finnegan's Wake that actually made me feel like I wanted to read it. And so I won't be reading it anytime soon. I want to reread the rest of Joyce first, but I might go and read Finnegan's Wake in a year or two's time. A lovely chapter on Orlando by Virginia Woolf, a book by Woolf that I haven't read yet. And for him, it's a book about the love of reading and the love of literature and how that's expressed in Orlando. A brilliant Kafka chapter. That was one where some of his strange Gnostic ideas, you know, it's sort of fair enough when you're talking about Kafka. And then one of the best ones in here, Borges, Neruda, and Pessoa. Hispanic Portuguese Whitman. And he's using Whitman as a jumping off point, and then seeing how these three writers and a couple of others, such as Octavio Paz, when I was reading Octavio Paz, I could definitely feel a Whitmanian influence there. But yeah, Neruda is kind of I think the equivalent to Walt Whitman in South America. Borges wanted to be Whitman very early on, and then diverged. And Pessoa, who with his heteronyms kind of outdid Whitman and was more Whitman than Whitman could ever be. So I really enjoyed that. And then a wonderful chapter on Samuel Beckett, and then how sort of Joyce, Proust, and Shakespeare all show up in his work. And again, I need to get some Beckett at some point. And so again, when it comes to him actually talking about what he loves, if you can tell, it gets me excited, and it gets me want to read. It gets me want to be reading these books. And where it's an author I already love, I'm enjoying it, and I'm sort of considering his view, and it's a lot of fun. However, again, there's just that issue of it being this diatribe against the state of culture and academia, that whatever your view on it is, just becomes very tiring very quickly. So yeah, that's I hope that makes some kind of sense. But that's sort of what I think of the Western canon by Harold Bloom, and then to a certain extent I found it the sort of least palatable of all of the things that I've read by him so far. Not to say that I didn't enjoy it, I did enjoy it. After those two, I really needed some lighter reading, and so I picked up The Invisible Child and The Fir Tree by Tove Janssen, two Moomin stories. Not too much to say about it, but they're lovely stories. Particularly The Fir Tree, but very seasonal, about the Moomins trying to actually work out what Christmas is, because they normally hibernate through the winter. And I just yesterday, as I'm filming, I reread Under Milkwood by Dylan Thomas, and actually having just read a few days before what Bloom had to say about Joyce, Joyce was very much in my mind as I was reading Under Milkwood, and there are definitely some instances where he's referencing it, whether he's paying homage or just being playful. I'm not sure. Maybe the most obvious one is quite early on in the sort of very early dream section, with Mr. Edwards and Miss Price. And Mr. Edwards says, Mavanwi, before the mice gnaw at your bottom drawer, will you say? And then Miss Price says, yes, Mog, yes, yes. So obviously playing on the end of Ulysses with Molly Bloom's monologue. But there are a few other instances, even the Bible Black, and the where is it? Starless and Bible Black, the Cobble Street Silence, and the Hunched Quarter, the Hunched Quarters and Rabbit's Wood, limping invisible down to the slow black, crow black, fishing. No, I've lost my place at crow black. Fishing boat, bobbing sea. There we go. But I kind of felt that was almost kind of Joycean as well. And I've been thinking a little as to, what was Dylan Thomas's sort of relationship to Joyce. He obviously had the book, a portrait of the artist as a young dog, and I sort of have a faint memory of being told that he had quite an ambivalent relationship to the modernists, and he he probably didn't really describe himself as a modernist. I think with Dylan Thomas, I think what you have is all of the flair of Joyce without the pretension. And so it's a kind of homelier, earthier, more accessible version of Joyce. You have the flair and the energy and the fun, but with less of the I don't want to use the word baggage. That sounds a little pejorative, but you know, it is a bit lighter than than reading Ulysses or something. So they're the books that I've been reading. I'm currently reading through the poetry of Wallace Stevens. I've been reading this with Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics, so I'll try to get back to you soon, Alan, about what I think about some of these poems. I just picked up today, I just read the first chapters, 2 chapters, The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, and I'm very much enjoying it. It's one of those books where there's just the occasional turn of phrase where you just think, yeah, I actually never thought of that before. Like the end of chapter 2. I'd never yell good luck at anybody. It sounds terrible when you think about it. So yeah, just lots of little things like that I really loved just in the first 2 chapters. So I think I'm going to enjoy it. But for now, that's me. That's what I've been reading recently and what I'm reading at the moment. I hope you found at least some of that interesting. Let me know what you think, if you agreed or disagreed or didn't know what to think. But for now, thank you very much for watching. Have a great rest of your year, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.